You're listening to the Beyond The Boardwalk Podcast with Andrew Wright.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Beyond The Boardwalk Podcast with me, Andrew Wright. Today we're looking at travel health and looking after yourself while you're away on holiday, and we're going to do that in the company of Thorrund Govind, a practicing pharmacist and lawyer. And you'll also know Thorrund from many TV appearances on the BBC, Sky ITV and Talk TV. Thorrund, hello, it's lovely to see you. How are you?
Lovely to be with you today. I'm so excited for this. I wish I was on holiday though.
We're all excited to talk about travel. But before we do that, I want to find out a bit more about you. As I said, you're a practicing pharmacist and a healthcare lawyer. How did you get into pharmacy? Because it's kind of not the sort of career that many people go into, is it?
So I started out as a pharmacist. I was always really interested in healthcare, but there are other practitioners other than being a doctor. So and people also try and label me as a doctor, but I'm not. I'm a pharmacist, and we've got a really important role to play in the health system. So really involved with minor ailments, with things like tummy troubles and pain, things like that. You might go and see your pharmacist about before you go into other parts of the health service. And we're also really focused on self-care and how you can look after yourself, which I know we're going to talk a bit more about anyway today. But so I qualified as a pharmacist, and then I've always been interested in law, and now I practice as a healthcare lawyer, but also as a practicing pharmacist. And then I do pop up on TV and talk about a whole range of things.
You're very modest about that. I've seen you everywhere in the last couple of weeks. So in terms of the TV and the radio work, was that a progression? How did that all come about?
So when I was, before I'd even qualified as a pharmacist, I recognised that we weren't very good at telling people what we do. I still don't think people know completely what we do, because we do more than provide medication. We provide a lot of advice to people. We help people stay well in their own homes, a lot of self-care advice, so that people can look after themselves maybe before they need to access healthcare services. But also maintaining healthcare, making sure people know where they might need to go if they've got a condition, for example. So you might not know if your condition is bad or what you need to do. So we can provide some advice on that. So we do lots of different things, and it's actually fantastic to be a pharmacist. And it's such a privilege, because we're at the heart of our local communities as well. So I feel very, very privileged to be a pharmacist.
And pharmacies are very much back in the news without getting too political. I mean, for example, last year I had my flu jab and a COVID booster at my pharmacist. Is that the sort of the way it's going now?
Yes, I think, we are accessible. I would say to people, you may have to wait. It's not a walk in and immediately see your pharmacist, because we're seeing more volume of people through our doors. But it's an accessible way that people can have a private consultation in our consultation room, for example. And people come to us because they might want to tell us about an issue that they have, and then they will decide that actually I might go and take the advice of the pharmacist and check in with them in a few weeks and let them know how I'm getting on to see if I need to do anything more. So that's why I say it's a privilege, because you're part of people's lives. And you'll have patients who've come in with their children, with their babies, and then you see the babies growing up, and that's what's nice.
In terms of the media work you do, what's your favourite? I saw you on Good Morning Britain, and I've seen you on This Morning. Which is your favourite?
I'm going to get told off now if I have a favourite. But what I would say is it's a privilege to be able to share health advice into people's homes, and to be able to empower them so that they think, I've got sunburn, and we're going to talk about sunburn later. What might be some steps that I can do at home before I go and see my pharmacist? Or if you've got an insect bite, what might be the first thing you do if you've just been bitten? What might you consider? So I think it's about that power to the people of ensuring that they know a little bit more about their health. And that is really why I've always done this, because I want people to know more about healthcare. I want them to know more about the NHS and how and access to healthcare, because if we all use healthcare services much better, So if I don't go to A&E, if I don't need to, and I go to my doctor instead, that actually means that when I do need A&E, it will be there for me, and it'll when it's the most appropriate place for me.
And what's it like in those TV studios? Do you like the whole dressing up and all that?
So I think this comes back to maybe why I enjoy some of the legal work that I do. So I sometimes end up in court, and what that means is you have to read something really quickly, analyze it, assess it, and then be able to speak about it pretty quickly, because I tend to react to breaking news. And so I don't know if you've not been in a TV studio, you probably don't wonder what it's like behind the scenes, but you'll usually get a phone call, and the phone call could be the day before going, can you go on TV? Or it could be, as happened, today, can you go on 20 minutes before, or something like that? And you will then, if you're at home on Zoom, you'll try and find a suitable place and work that out. Or if you've got to get to the studio, it will be a dash to the studio. You will get put in some makeup, because TV lights are a little bit different to our lighting at home. You'll get mic'd up, and then you will get on there, and you will say your bit. But I think it's the adrenaline rush is quite interesting for me.
Let's talk travel, which is what we're here for today.
Yeah.
As a starting point, let's just assume that we're going to, for want of a better word, a developed country, so Asia, Europe, or the USA, where potentially there's a supermarket or pharmacy is easily accessible. What should we be looking to pack in our luggage as a kind of basic medical kit to take away?
Okay, so your basic medical kit would be things like cotton swabs, some bandages, some plasters, thermometers. You might want some tweezers in there, aloe vera gel. You might have a sort of topical corticosteroid, which will help with bites and stings. You might also consider that you need some gloves, for example. So those are the typical sorts of things in first aid kits. But what I would say is there's lots of first aid kits on the market, and it's all very well just going and buying something, but you actually need to know how to use it. And there can be a lot of, I'm going to say junk, let's get to it. There can be a lot of junk in those kits. You need to make sure that the kit that you're carrying is suitable for you as an individual. Imagine you've got a latex allergy and the only gloves you've got in your kit are latex gloves, for example. So think about things like that. Look at the kits that are on the market, but you might consider just making up your own, because also what you like. I know that, for example, if the plasters are too small, I know it's going to irritate me, so I'd rather put a bigger plaster on a cut, for example. So I think it's about thinking about what you are going to need, and like you might have at home, and reducing it down, because obviously, as we know, they love to stick a big fine on you if your suitcase is too heavy, don't they?
And that's not even getting started on the liquid rules either, which we'll touch on in a moment. In terms of, if we're going farther afield, I've been to the Caribbean quite a lot recently. I'm thinking safari, in Africa, a desert safari in Dubai, for example. These are kind of rough examples. But how would you tailor a kit for the situation where there's not any pharmacies close by, for example?
Okay, so we've covered what should be in your sort of basic first aid kit. In addition, I think we might not always appreciate that our clothing plays a really important part in protection as well. So you've got your first aid kit, but also if you think about if you're going on safari, I would be wanting to protect my legs. So I'd be packing lightweight trousers, because actually that's going to protect me from getting bitten. It's going to protect me from potential sunburn. So don't think of your clothing as as a fashion statement. Think of what you pack also as playing a part in your health as well. So I wouldn't be going on holiday without my sunglasses, and I'd be making sure that they are, to CE standards. I'd be making sure they're proper sunglasses, they've got the appropriate protection, and also, the insect repellent. So to me, I would want a DEET containing insect repellent, which is one of the stronger ones, and that's because that's the most appropriate for me. And then also we're talking about sunscreen, and I wear sunscreen every day in England. But obviously when I'm abroad, you'll be thinking of higher factors. So if you are going somewhere where it might be more challenging to access healthcare, you might be tempted to think, I should take some antibiotics. And so I just want to really get into this because unless you're traveling to a remote area where medical facilities are really difficult to access, antibiotics wouldn't be part of your first aid kit. And that's really because antibiotic resistance is really widespread globally, Andrew. And you might be aware of this, but when there's pharmacies abroad, they don't always necessarily check if an antibiotic is appropriate in the same way as here. So you might get excited and think, oh, it's great over there, I can get any antibiotic I want, but that's not necessarily a good thing. So I'll come back to it. So where antibiotics shouldn't really be part of your first aid kit, because it also increases the chance of bringing back bacteria that are resistant to the UK and spreading it to others. So I think it's about, I'd also think, what do the locals do as well? How are they managing their healthcare? Because I think sometimes you can derive a lot of knowledge from the local customs. So it's a difficult question what you might think about if you were going to somewhere where pharmacies aren't readily available. But also I would think about the lifestyle of people who are out there. If they're not basking in the midday sun from 11 till 3, which I'd advise you not to, because obviously you're going to end up with potential dehydration, then I wouldn't be doing that if I was out in those sorts of areas as well.
In terms of getting these medical kits, presumably your pharmacist should be the first port of call.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, let's not beat about the bush here. You could go on Google, you could find something from absolutely anywhere, but it's about, I think I would be more inclined to make up a first aid kit that suits the needs of me and my family. And you're going to need to think about medication that you're going to include in there. So I know that I can take paracetamol. So paracetamol would be in my first aid kit. I know that I don't particularly like antihistamines that make me drowsy. So I would be making sure there were non-drowsy antihistamines in my first aid kit. But I know that some parents, because there is an antihistamine that can make you drowsy, that is a preference for some parents when they're traveling with children, because they might think, well, I need to provide an antibiotic, which one should I look at? And they're thinking it will soothe the child may feel a little bit better, so they might go for something like a chloramphenemine. Then they might go for something like a loratadine or a cetirizine. So I think, again, tailoring, when you're at home and you've got the luxury of planning, being able to think about the needs of you and your family and the travelers that you're with is really important, because it's that preparation which is going to put you in good stead when something does happen.
And in terms of airport chemists, and I'm thinking when you're actually in the departure lounge, we've been told that the liquid rules are going to change, and basically you can take whatever through. But for now, presumably they're a useful source for not just a bottle of water, but suntan oil and stuff like that too.
Yeah, I mean, so I've worked in an airport pharmacy, and it's an experience. So we have, it's honestly, I have to tell you this, it's an experience. You feel awful every day because everyone else is going on holiday and you are not. So someone will be like, I'm off to Australia now. And you'll be like, I'm going home now because I've been up for hours. So the shift pattern work at airport pharmacies, as you can imagine, starting at 6 a.m. and finishing at 1 p.m. And people would come in and they'd come and see you. And sometimes they would be in a complete panic and a complete rush because, for example, they'd forgotten their medication. And you would have to try and work out a way of providing them with that medication. But I would say, please don't leave it till last minute. If you can avoid using your airport pharmacy to get medication, then I would be going for that. I'd be trying to sort it out before I get to that position. But I also know people who order sunscreen and other things that they need in advance of traveling, so that they don't even have to carry anything to the airport. They breeze through security, pick up their airport liquids from their chemist, from the pharmacy. I'm going to get told off for saying chemist. And then it's a really easy way forward. So things like I would be picking up, if I didn't have any, things like, even shower gel, your sunscreen, anti-bac. So anti-bac, something I would take with me if I was traveling. Things like Savlon, those little things that you might not have thought about. It's great that you can pick them up from the airport pharmacy. I think it's reassuring, actually, to know that they are there. But please try and plan ahead, because what I will tell you, Andrew, is I've had, as you can you imagine the flight's going to take off for half an hour. Someone's realised they've forgotten this medication. And there are mechanisms by which pharmacists are allowed to supply certain medications. But you've got to think, one, is that airport pharmacy going to have that item in stock? Because, it doesn't carry the huge amount that maybe a pharmacy on the high street might carry. And then the other issue is sometimes some drugs legally we cannot provide in even if it is an emergency. So I would say plan ahead if you are someone who needs medication, but also it is useful if you're an organised person for getting everything sorted.
You're listening to the Beyond the Boardwalk Podcast with Andrew Wright.
In terms of if you take regular medication, and I'm one of those people, I have asthma, so I take asthma inhalers. When I go away, I take 3 sets. I normally put 2 in my carry-on, and I put 1 in the hold in my checked baggage. Is that wise, or are there implications of putting stuff in the hold baggage?
Okay, so all medications I would be having it in your original packaging. Make sure you've got the label of it on there. What I do as well is I encourage patients to take a picture of their prescription so that they've got a copy and we can see it's all legal, because I just think that's really helpful. I personally wouldn't put medication that I really needed in the hold, because I would be concerned about the temperatures in the hold. And that's just a pharmacist who thinks about the temperature of medications and how things are stored. So my carry-on always has I don't have any regular medications, but I would have my regular prescribed medication with proof that I am on it. And that could be a picture on my mobile phone, for example, and I'd make sure it had any labels on from the pharmacy. I always take a change of clothes in my in my carry-on, because I always worry about lost suitcases. And I always think, worst comes to worst, at least I've got a change of clothes if anything happens. If you have any medical issues, you've got that. Is all, if I used to suffer from terrible travel sickness on the aeroplanes, and to be able to just get to your destination and have a quick shower and not even have to worry about your hold luggage. You don't have to unpack your suitcase when you get there. To be that just so nice when you're not feeling that great after traveling. So that's my top tip. But what I would also say is you must check the embassy website of where you are going to.
That is very good advice, because some countries have different rules. So that's really good advice. In terms of inoculations, I had a yellow fever one. We're going back 25, 30 years here to go to the Gambia. Do you still need to be aware of inoculations, or are they a thing of the past these days?
You definitely need to think about inoculation. So in the NHS, there's a routine immunisation schedule, which we're all should be having. So that would be my starting point. So check what vaccinations you've already had. but it doesn't cover all of the infectious diseases found overseas. So what you then need to think about is what vaccines are needed for the specific area where you are traveling. And some vaccines need to be given really well in advance to allow your body to develop immunity. And it also depends on the type of travel that you're doing. If you're going to a more rural area, if you're backpacking, if you were camping rather than staying in a hotel, for example, or if your trip was much longer, then that will also factor into the considerations as to whether the vaccinations that you might need.
And in terms of malaria tablets, are they still a thing?
Definitely still a thing. So make sure to check in good time, again, like I've said, as to what's most appropriate to you. But also, it depends where you're going, of course. And what you also need to consider is any other medication that you might be on, because your healthcare professional will need to check that we are able to give you the correct malaria medication for you.
Let's spend our final few minutes talking about holiday mishaps. I feel a bit like a crash test dummy here, but we'll use another example from me. I went to the beautiful island of Antigua in the Caribbean last year. Absolutely gorgeous. Came out the sea one day, within a couple of hours. I had kind of bites on my legs. When that happens, what do we do? What's the first course of action? So
the first thing I would be thinking of, obviously we've all got varying levels of medical knowledge, but if you are immediately stuck, I'd be looking at the NHS website to see if there's any guidance on there as to what might be the best thing to do, because sometimes in that occasion, you may not have access to a healthcare professional straight away. What I would say is, as part of your preparation for going away, if you have a rash, for example, you will tend to come out in redness, which is the histamine, which gets released at the area, in the area. And histamine is a chemical in our body that rushes to that area to protect us. But that's why you get your bumps and your rash and your itchiness. It's from that histamine. So we want it to happen, but our body, we don't particularly like it when it happens. So you need to think about how you might look after yourself if you have sunburn, for example, if you have a rash. Make sure that you're prepared, just like you would be in England, for example, as to how you're going to look after yourself. Holiday mishaps for me, I remember my mum burnt herself when we were in some self-catered accommodation abroad, which was a nightmare, just because also there's sometimes the strangest things that locals may suggest to do. So I think, bear in mind what locals say, but also consider your own health knowledge and awareness and maybe check that as well. Urinary tract infections on holiday are a nightmare. I can say that as a female, because obviously in that scenario you may need antibiotics, but obviously they may not check the antibiotics that you need in the same way that they might check you here. So those are the two probably my worst things for me on holiday, but I'm sure listeners will have some to share with us.
Let's finish today. I've been dying to ask you, where does Thorrund go on holiday?
Well, I've got some exciting plans in the future. I'd love to go to Australia because I really want to go to Sydney. But if I'm honest, work's a bit hectic because we talked about at the start. Now a beach holiday where I'm just sat on the beach for a week, reading some books and having that time is actually what I want the most these days.
Thorrund Govind, it's been a delight to talk to you today on the Beyond The Boardwalk podcast. Thank you so much for all your helpful information and all that great advice. Thank you.
Thank you.